how do you bring in your coaching work, working with science teachers? What are some of the first things you do with science teachers to get them on board in understanding the importance of building and reading and writing strategies in the science classroom?
The funny thing is that to get the work started actually in our school, we leaned on friends. You have to leverage what you have, and our best leverage is our colleagues. So we were able to convince science teachers to come and have lunch with a group of English teachers. And together, those two groups in talking wanted to, as teachers do, lean on each other to see, hey, what do you do that can benefit my work? What do science teachers do that can benefit the English classroom? How can we leverage English teachers to help our kids in science? And the first thing that our freshman bio teachers and our freshman English teachers realized was that the formula that the English teachers were using to have kids write was very close to what the science teachers wanted to do with a more formulaic build out of writing conclusions for labs. So the two groups got together and we actually were able to kind of decide on a common vocabulary and a kind of common, we leaned on Think Serca's work, claim evidence reasoning, and we're able to build out similarities between English and science. And the science teachers really bought in. This makes sense. And our kids can connect the work in science now to the writing they do in English, and it became a lot easier. And once, to be honest with you, your friends can display and find success. And so our friends in science were like, wow, this really worked. And they were really excited about it. It becomes much easier to sell to everybody else. And a lot of times when I work with other schools, other teachers, that's my biggest sell point at the beginning. Because, John, your question's a great one. How do we get into this work? How do we sell it to science teachers? I tell them, like, look, your biggest resource are your friends. Sell it to them, do something great, and then the work sells itself.
Katie?
So
And I think we're better together, and we have more in common across disciplines. And when we do have the opportunity to collaborate and work together, that's when that information comes out and shines and we find these solutions. And I think another point that has been really, really meaningful in this work is frankly using data to inform our instruction. And as a literacy specialist and working, which, we're operating in the framework of the science of reading and working with my science colleagues, the one thing that we all really like to do is to take a look at our data and ask some questions. And when we do that together, that's where we get to some understandings. And that has been tremendously beneficial in my work within my own building, with my own teams, with my science colleagues, and in my school and outside, and in supporting other schools as we're working on MTSS mapping and curriculum mapping. And I think that whether we're talking about the science department or literacy specialists, I think we can all agree that there have been some really, really, maybe we're in this position with our literacy situation because a lot of decisions have been made in the absence of data and based on a lot of hunches historically. And when we have the information and we have the data, we can make informed decisions, or at least we have a lead of something to investigate. And that's really been very, very fruitful, I think, in terms of taking small steps forward into an inquiry-based approach towards collaboration.
And we're definitely going to get Maureen's take on this question too about bringing in science teachers. But one follow-up, Katie, when you said you looked at the data, what did the data reveal about the reading and writing needs of students, particularly in science, but also just in general? So, what did your data reveal about the writing and reading needs of your students in science and or just in terms of having literacy in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what we're looking at, right? And I think what's fascinating, we can look at is some sort of macro data point, like we can look at our state report card. And sometimes that might tell us some sort of large global number, but we need to get into some more finite information in order to really understand how I need to operationalize my instruction in my classroom. And that's where something like our text or a strategy-based approach is going to really come into play, right? Where we can take a look at a data point or multiple data points and look at relative strengths and weaknesses in the literacy realm. How do we actually support a reader, and how do we actually help a student grow in terms of their literacy skill set? If we have an overarching goal, whether that is the idea of proficiency, whether that's the idea of a certain ACT or SAT score, those are all very, very global scores. That doesn't really tell me as a teacher what I need to do in the classroom or what that child needs to do. That's just a very, very big kind of like pie in the sky goal. But when we look at more finite data, whether that's a classroom-based assessment that I've created with my team, that we've been able to team together, kind of do some calibration, some norming there, or I'm looking at a literacy assessment, a diagnostic, that's also going to be telling. When we look at some of these, honestly, typically, and it's a comprehension concern, more often than not, seeing background knowledge and vocabulary, that always comes up, and vocab. That's like the number one. We just need to start working on something in our department. And maybe science teachers listening to this right now are saying, yes, my kids need academic vocabulary. That's a big request, right? That's a big one. And the list keeps growing, of course. So those are definitely two needs. But yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your population, but that's a pretty global need.
And we're definitely going to get into some of the strategies. I don't expect you to give me all the strategies in your book because obviously we want people to pick up the book, but we're definitely going to get into a few strategies that you would recommend that science teachers have told you have been very helpful in teaching the sciences through reading and writing. But before we do that, Maureen, how about you? How did you get science teachers on board in your work?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off a little bit of what both Dan and Katie both talked about too and kind of bring it together. You know, Dan was talking about leaning on our friends in our buildings and kind of getting them to buy into the literacy and science. And, you know, we sit down and we review the data, we look at that information. I'm not going to get into the specific strategies right now because we're going to talk about those, but I think the biggest piece that we feel is really important when we're coaching those science teachers and working with them is that there needs to be some type of tangible takeaway from every single time that we are working with them one-on-one or in a team setting or in a professional development setting. So we have learned and again, goes across all the disciplines. If we're working with our social studies teachers, our math teachers, our English teachers, our special ed teachers, anyone, we need to make sure that there is time built into our work so that they have something that is created and they can take away and implement in their classroom the next period, the next day, the next week. So that is a lot of times something like Katie was saying, something that focuses on academic vocabulary within the sciences, or that could be a Frayer model, talking about the CER, the, claim evidence reasoning and providing graphic organizers for that. That's where our specialty comes in as literacy coaches and the literacy experts. So we can take their content and frame that for them, and they have that tangible piece to then implement with their students immediately.